Now that Secret of the Mimic is out and I feel like most of us can agree on what the main story is, I feel like now we're in a position where we have to start asking about how this game connects to the rest of the series. And for a game set this early in the timeline, it connects with nearly everything. We'll mostly be focusing on the Steel Wool era of FNaF for this video though, and specifically talking about a mystery that just had some more light shed on it. I'm talking about Glitchtrap. But before we get too carried away, remember to subscribe, you will not regret it. Love him or hate him, I think most of us can agree that Glitchtrap was the breakout character Steel Wool wanted us to get attached to. First showing up in Help Wanted, Glitchtrap is described to us as an entity that first came into the game after some circuit boards had been scanned into it. These circuit boards were provided by Fazbear Entertainment to Silver Parasol Games, who would then try to use them to create pathfinding for their NPCs. And that's all we're really told about where Glitchtrap comes from. But throughout Help Wanted, we also learned what their role is, specifically in driving the playtester Jeremy insane, to the point it seems like he may have willingly cut his own face off with a paper guillotine. That's not what I really believe though, and you can check out this video to see what I think happened to Jeremy. From then on, Glitchtrap would have small cameos in Security Breach and Help Wanted 2, appearing as an overarching figure. However, in both these games they also share screen time with a malicious version of Helpy, spelled Helpy. As far as we can tell, Helpy and Glitchtrap could be the same entity. But then we had a little game to throw a spanner in the works, because Secret of the Mimic tears everything you thought you knew about Glitchtrap apart. So first off, we need to talk about M1 and M2. The secret of the Mimic, as it turns out, was that they weren't really the first Mimic, or at least their mind wasn't the first one in the Mimic body. So in order to sort of reverse engineer Security Breach and those surrounding titles, we need to establish when we're looking at these individual minds. I think the most obvious cases are with Mexus and, well, the Mimic. In Secret of the Mimic, the violent Mimic pursuing us for most of the game is M2, as they're the one with control over the body at this point in time after M1 was removed and placed in Mexus. Mexus, as it turns out, is a storage device created by Edwin. However, between Ruin and Secret of the Mimic, there is at least one pretty major cosmetic difference we'll have to touch on later. Regardless, what does this mean for Ruin? Well, it definitely changes the dynamic we saw between Mexus and the Mimic. Throughout the majority of Ruin's lifespan, the belief we had was that Mexus was trying their best to prevent us from getting to the Mimic in order to keep them locked away down there. And while part of that may still be true, knowing this relationship based on how it is presented in Ruin changes things drastically. If M1, or Fiona, really is Mexus, then what is the entity's actual goal? If you ask me, Mexus is an oddball that I don't have a firm answer to just yet. However, one entity it actually makes more sense for Fiona to be is Helpy. This entity not only acts like they're separate from the Mimic itself, but it's actually displaying behaviors Fiona does in Secret of the Mimic, mimicking some kindly guide or instructor while leading us further and further into the dragon's den. And that cosmetic change I mentioned earlier? Well, M1's Mexus is marked with a name, F10 and 4, Leet speak for Fiona. However, the one seen in Ruin is simply labeled MXCS. In my opinion, these could be separate computers, which isn't surprising considering we know from Secret of the Mimic that there are at least 2 of these. However, something also possible is that Mexus is meant to contain M1, and the entity rabbit we see is trying its best to prevent M1, or Helpy, from escaping through Cassie and the Vanny mask. There's a lot that could be true about Mexus, but let's step back a bit before Ruin to the main game of Security Breach. In the entirety of Security Breach, we see a lot of completely different but still corrupted machinery. So who's really running this place? Well, through Vanny, we know that Glitchtrap to some degree is running the show. And because the animatronics are specifically unable to see Vanny, we can assume that they're meant to be subservient to her. This then applies as well to the Glamrock endos presumably, since we see plenty of evidence of Vanny interacting with them, and specifically even drawing Glitchtrap near them. The daycare attendant could also perhaps be corrupted by Glitchtrap, but there's a couple things with that give me pause. For one, the daycare attendant does not have the same behaviors as a regular Glamrock. It switches back and forth between 2 radically different personalities, and unlike the Glamrocks, it's actually smart enough to rip Gregory out of Freddy if you happen to be caught by him. In fact, in Help Wanted 2's Princess Quest ending, when Vanny destroys Glitchtrap, she's only joined by one other character, Moon. Does this mean they're separate entities who both want to destroy Glitchtrap, or is Moon just another pawn of Glitchtrap? I'll leave it up to you to decide. But regardless, I think we can agree that Glitchtrap is in charge of things at the Pizzaplex during Security Breach. I know we've talked this long to get to a point we all agreed on back when this game came out. But I bring it up because it's important to figure out who is leading the charge. M1, M2, or even some other third party like Edwin's spirit or Afton's spirit. And as we established, M1 seems to be Helpy, and Helpy, based on Help Wanted 2, seems to be Glitchtrap. Something worth noting that is consistent across Secret of the Mimic, Help Wanted 1 and Help Wanted 2 is our guide character becoming very pushy, giving us an instruction that either doesn't make much sense or would serve to benefit our enemy more than us. And in Secret of the Mimic, we learn that this is a trick being played on us by M1. M1 mimics the Dispatch's voice, much like we believe Glitchtrap mimics the Tape Girl's voice. In both those cases, as well as with Helpy, we are then urged into surrendering our control, be it our data diver or our mind. But I hear you saying, what about M2? Well, the thing with M2 is that it definitely doesn't seem like any sort of mastermind. Our few interactions with it now have cemented in place how it doesn't really seem to think, it just acts on emotion, specifically rage. It's a slave to its programming and never quite worked right. It never speaks with us directly, unlike M1, who's willing to speak with us in person. So for me at least, it makes more sense for M1 to be Glitchtrap and Helpy, and for M2 to simply be locked in the basement. And if that's the case, we can start to finally understand Security Breach. I think similarly to in Secret of the Mimic, M1 is looking to protect the Mimic, or M2. In Secret, it really only lets Arnold by when it doesn't have a choice, and begs that we make the right call and fix M2. Let's briefly look to the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. Although these may not strictly be canon anymore, many events from them do seem to have an effect on the games, at least in the sense the Barris plot structure is the same. Edwin, David, and Fiona still exist in the books, although Fiona dies much earlier and there isn't a distinction made between M1 and M2. However, in The Storyteller, when Edwin sees the code that's spreading in the Pizzaplex through the Storyteller's computer, it's Mimic 1, M1. But why would M1 need to control everything? Why would she corrupt and distort every character? I think it's because that's what she needed to protect M2. Control Roxy, control Freddy, control the security, who can stop her? Need more proof that it's Fiona in charge? Well, let's once again look at the Sapphire silo in this dinner table. A long time ago, I called this out as the Afton family, but that doesn't seem to make sense anymore. Something else I called out though, and something rather unique here, is how the mother figure is at the head of the table. Fiona. That would make two of these other figures Edwin and David, with two others, and I think that these could potentially be Vanessa and Gregory, two other proxies Fiona's created that would now be a part of her family. Remember all those strange rooms in Security Breach that seem connected to Help Wanted? Well, consider now that Fazbear has legitimately taken a lot of MCM's resources and ideas. Maybe these recreations that were first seen in Help Wanted actually come from MCM's projects, which M1 then recreates in Security Breach. But the big question I have now is this. Why would Fiona choose to be Glitchtrap of all things? Well, in my opinion, there's a couple possibilities. For starters, it could be that because she's trying to manipulate Fazbear Entertainment, she's taken on an ironic form as their original business owner, similar to how she took the role of Dispatch. Note that this Glitchtrap suit follows all the same design philosophies of Edwin's mascot costumes as well. Another reason could be she has some unknown relationship with specifically William Afton that is yet to be revealed. As far as we know so far, Fiona did not like William or Henry, and tried to warn Edwin about them. It's possible then that she took this form specifically to spite William. Those are my best guesses at the moment, but we don't really have an answer just yet. And that's not the only thing that goes unanswered. Like, why did the Nightmare staff bots have that weird message painted on them? What makes Freddy and Roxy break their corrupted coding? And what does any of this mean for the daycare attendant? Well, at the moment, all I have are guesses. I can guess that Freddy and Roxy are still inhabited by Mimic 1, it's just in a more docile mode, similar to how Arnold could put M2 in a docile mode with some specific audio cues. In fact, that makes sense specifically for Freddy since we know some conditions like running out of power do switch him back to that hostile mode. As for the staff bots, we know MCM was involved with creating the puppet, so maybe it ties into that. And the daycare attendant, I mean, if we believe in Secret of the Mimic that Moon is supposed to be Edwin, Sun is Fiona, and Eclipse is David, I mean, I don't know what any of it means, but it sure sounds interesting. The last thing I want to touch on is Help Wanted 2. Throughout this game, although we encounter Glitchtrap, we hear a line of dialogue be repeated through different characters.
What makes you so special?
What makes you so special? And we never had a proper answer for this. However, now we have to ask, what does this question mean if it's coming from Fiona? What makes Cassie's dad so special? Is he somehow immune to becoming a proxy, or did he maybe somehow reprogram himself? But what if the question is more personal? Something that we see more of in this game than in previous ones is Fall Fest, with a couple minigames taking place in it and even ending in a fire. But why is Fiona showing us this? Why were we the one chosen to be a part of this game? In my opinion, it's possible that somehow we're a survivor of the fire. Now, that isn't my preferred answer since it would make Cassie's dad ancient by the time he has her, but it's only my first guess. Let's circle back to the proxy theory. What makes Cassie's dad so special? Well, maybe it's because he's cognizant, he hasn't lost his mind. A big part of Secret's story is Edwin not being able to recreate M1. For some reason, M2 doesn't work while M1 does. I'm willing to bet Edwin asked the same question to M1. What makes you so special? If this is the case, M1 asking us this question could mean two things. One, it's just mimicking dialogue it's heard before, or two, it's trying to figure out why we didn't go insane, why we're resistant to the proxification process, why we can take the Vanny mask on and off and not suffer hallucinations, as far as we're aware anyway. So maybe, just maybe, this question is asking us why we're the perfect candidate to be the filler mind that fixes M2. Maybe that's why we're disposed of in such a grotesque way, and why Maskbot has such a unique internal view that no other animatronic in the game has. But that's a lot of maybes. Maybe I'm just reading too much into this one line, and maybe Fiona really is just repeating a line Edwin asked her from the past. But I think the biggest takeaway from this video should be that we now have a substantial reason why Glitchtrap and the Mimic don't really feel like the same character, even though logic and evidence we had on hand would lead us to believe that they were. We didn't know until Secret of the Mimic that there are technically two Mimics. This answer even fills in odd moments, like Helpy and Gregory arguing in Ruin. Before Secret came out, this conversation looked like the Mimic was playing pretend with itself, which, although funny, wasn't narratively satisfying. That's what I like the most about this theory. It allows us to continue following the Mimic's story while explaining why things felt so much larger than they actually seemed. Glitchtrap, Helpy, Vanny, Dr. Rabbit, none of it felt like it connected to this ravenous, near-feral endoskeleton in the basement, even though that seemed to be the case. The one thing I question now is, what does this mean for Burntrap? Well, unfortunately, we still don't have the cleanest answer for that, but if you'd like to hear what I think, leave it in the comments. And if there's other topics you want me to talk about, leave them in the comments too. Until then, I'm Demuted, be sure to subscribe, and peace.